And we're good.
All right. Hey, everybody listening and watching. Welcome to the Friendly Aussie podcast and the Altmed podcast.
Yeah, it's a collab this week.
A dual collaborative podcast. We're going to be interviewing each other this time around, which is a bit of a new concept for us. But yeah, we're really excited. We're here with Mitch and Andrew from Altmed, which is a medical cannabis information platform publication. And they're doing many, many different things at the moment. So we'd like to explore what they're up to, their background, and just jump right into it. So, hey guys, how you doing?
Yeah, good. Thanks for the intro, Mitch. And yeah, likewise, this is a sort of a new area for us too, having some fellow podcasters on the Altmed podcast. So yeah, we're looking forward to hearing about some of the stuff you guys are up to. So I guess in that vein, I'm just going to completely take over and ask first about you guys. So Joe, Mitch, the Friendly Aussie podcast, just talk us through it. What have you guys set up? Talk to me about your journey today.
Yeah, the podcast is it's something we started maybe a year to almost 3 years ago now, somewhere between 2 and 3 years. It's been going for a little while. We had a bit of a break while we were trying to work out. We had some legal troubles last year, but we'll go into that later. But the whole
now I realize the whole reason I'm on this podcast.
Yeah, right, exactly. So you can help us with. We just wanted some free legal.
We just wanted live help, you know.
Live help,
and everyone can watch. Everyone can listen in on it. Yeah, no. The podcast is basically it's a concept that Josip and I just cooked up because we're like every other cannabis enthusiast. We're like, what if we did a podcast, man? That'd be pretty cool. And so we figured out that if we created a podcast, we could speak with all different kinds of people in the community, in the industry. It could be great content, but it could also be a great way for us to extend ourselves out and learn different things from all different kinds of people. So been doing that for a little while. It's been really fun. It's been a big part of us growing and developing as Friendly Aussie Buds, moving into spaces outside of just written material and doing, audio and video and all those kinds of things. So it's been a big deal.
Well, it's kind of like we can exchange notes with each other about, who was good on our show, the episodes that rated really well. Like we'll just completely raid your sort of like collection of podcast guests. I feel like we can exchange notes there, but
totally.
But yeah, it sounds like, I had a skim. So you guys pretty much tackle anything and everything to do with cannabis from what I could see. Do you guys have a particular area? Like,
we look at ourselves as, I guess, the cultural community of Australia. Like we're really about the cannabis culture within a broader Australian community. So we don't really tie ourselves to any medical clinic or pharmacy or doctors or any suppliers in that regard, but we also don't tie ourselves to, the old Nimbin hippies. Some would call them the ancients. So we sit outside of that and we kind of look at ourselves as, I don't know, a bit of an independent media conglomerate. That's not really a conglomerate. It's just a bunch of dudes that like cannabis, We just try to provide content that's, quite well researched and informative for the Australian community. Either in a medical sense or a recreational sense. We don't really like to provide too much of a distinction because we see it as a bit of, it's still the same plant in the end, whether you want to label it medical or recreational, it's still cannabis.
Yeah, we definitely see it as a spectrum. We think a lot of people on the medicinal program have a history in the recreational space and in the culture. And we also see that people in the recreational space that haven't yet, gotten onto the medical side, they're often using it for medical reasons. So we see a lot of overlap there. We initially did start off more as a recreational type thing. We kind of branded ourselves in that way.
At the time,
Well, yeah, it was relatively limited when we first started. Very different to what it is today. Yeah. But since we live in Queensland has become recently like one of the biggest areas for this kind of explosion within the medical scene. So we're beginning to embrace that a lot more. We like speaking to people.
I've sort of ever since, I mean, Mitch and I are both Victorian, but I've always regarded every Queenslander I ever met as a bit of a pothead. And, I really feel like Queensland has lived up to that in recent years. No,
regardless of whether they smoke or not. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, this is why I enjoy spending time with Queenslanders more than Victorians. But
I think we're just a bit troppo, to be honest.
Just a bit more chilled out. It's
like
too fucking hot.
Yeah.
Sub-troppo.
Yeah, sub-troppo.
But it's like, yeah, I'm like so impressed. So many people that are using cannabis medicinally here with a prescription in Victoria or in New South Wales are getting it from a doctor or, a clinic up in Queensland. I really feel like Queensland has truly paved the way. And of course, Rich and I recently were up there for the United in Compassion conference and got to kind of see almost like what you're describing in terms of your guest profile today. We saw people that are, strictly at one end of the spectrum, pure medicinal, pharmaceutical approach. And I must admit, the whole space must just be a completely wild ride for them compared to what they're used to with ordinary pharmaceutical space. But yeah, then there were definitely people up there that, were representing the black market and sort of saying that, access is still a problem for a lot of people, particularly people who just want to use it for their own well-being rather than they're sort of not like, I don't have a chronic medical condition, therefore I don't need a script, but I still want to use it. Well, the current regulations don't really provide for that. So yeah, sure. It's an interesting space, and I know we might. I think Mitch flagged it up front, but yeah, we can totally dive into a bit of a regs chat later on. Keep it interesting for everyone as well, because it can get a bit dry. I mean, we did sit through a whole lecture of the head of the TGA up at the conference, and yeah, saw a few yawns throughout.
How did because I wasn't there? How did the whole conference go? How was it?
It was good. The reg stuff, as Andrew said, is a bit dry. It makes him wet, but it's pretty dry. Yeah, but otherwise,
is my wet not contagious? I'm just
everything was
a
bit wet up there.
That's a strong.
It's just a puddle that everyone's sitting in. Yeah.
Well, to be honest, the weather up there, it really didn't do sunshine.
It was so wet, actually.
But that actually wasn't the rain, though. That was just me listening to the TGA. I don't understand what anyway.
I remember coming into the complex, the Novotel or whatever, and you just have to drive through this puddle that makes you feel like you're four-wheel driving, water splashing. You're like, holy shit, am I gonna get out of here?
Yeah, it was a bit like that. But no, otherwise it was really good. A lot of people that we'd been speaking on basically Zoom for the last couple of years. Just get to meet them in the flesh, doctors and pharmacists and company execs and the rest. It was just great. It was a very good vibe. Everyone was full of life. And
I had a few people saying it's so good to see you guys kind of up here. You've been locked up for the last 2 years. I'm like, I wasn't in jail. Don't get me wrong. I mean, went through some rough times during lockdown, but it was just good to see the whole community in the.
They just meant because you're a lawyer, I think.
In the court system.
Possibly. Very good.
So I guess it's probably coming back to your point about how we got into the space.
We'd like to hear more about that.
Yeah, I guess similarly to yours, but slightly differently. It was definitely over maybe a joint, but the joint was the preceding thing that we got into, which was our original business, Phytoka, and that saw us being importers and suppliers of some different products, which I can get into the backstory of originally. Mm-hmm. But as a result of that, we saw a lot of people asking, or rather telling us that, the industry is out to get them, the corporate greed in the sector, the government wants to keep this stuff illegal. And I just thought there was more to the story and a little bit more of a personal element, at least, for some of the faceless names that are in the industry. And we wanted to give a face to those names and basically say, check out these people. This is what they're about. This is what they're actually doing in the industry. It's not all the government's out to get me. Yes, things could be better. Yes, access could be better. Yes, it's not as dangerous, we don't think, as many people say. However, if you're following the Australian kind of protocol and producing the highest quality and being the most conservative, safe type of country that we are, these people are playing by the rules, and they're doing it in the interest of, yes, themselves, but also others. It's not as clear cut. It's not as black and white as everybody thinks it is. I don't think, and I definitely support legalization, but I'm just saying that in order to deal with our current infrastructure in Australia, there's more to it, and we wanted to uncover some of that. So, as a result of Phytoka, Altmed was kind of born as this.
Just as a vehicle to kind of demystify everything, because I think picking up on that point, a lot of people who I know had been involved in various cannabis circles and attempts to legalize an access pathway for medical cannabis, got to remember these people have been burnt so many times over decades, and just trying and just beating their head against the wall. And I guess it got to a point for a lot of people that they've kind of just been like, well, screw you, government. I'm going to, do a homegrow and, campaign for a homegrow amnesty. And, if I get caught, I get caught, but I'll at least be able to tell a magistrate that, I need it for a medical condition or something. So people really were pushed to the brink. And I do remember in Victoria, when we first legalized, that a lot of the press was around parents with, kids with autism and epilepsy and these kinds of conditions that really, could benefit from CBD. And so, I think we almost we sort of dropped in at around that time. We had people that were disaffected by years of inaction. And then when the government finally cedes on the point, they actually create this highly complex system that's difficult for both doctors and patients to navigate. And our sort of attempt has been, if we just put more and more information out there, and we really try to be balanced about it. We were once accused by a pain doctor who we invited, very vocal, this guy against the medical cannabis industry, and we invited him on the show because we wanted to hear an alternative perspective. But he said, I couldn't go on your show because you guys are too biased about cannabis. I'm like, well, here we are offering you a platform to tell us otherwise. So he was a bit of a dipshit, but that's, that's part of it. But yeah, so we've attempted to put really balanced, independent information out there about it and let people make up their own minds. And in the course of even just the 2 years we've been doing this, we've seen access improve, and I think we are on a good trajectory. But I suppose to anyone who, probably sticks to the, this shouldn't be legislated, I guess all I can really say is look around you, look at every other aspect of life in Australia. We regulate everything in this country. So, why would the government just allow a completely deregulated market with cannabis, which has, so many different applications? We have, food safety standards. We have so many aspects of regulation that touch our lives. So to me, it's not so surprising that we've gone the way that we have gone, but sure. I would, of course, like to see it improved from here.
Yeah, I'm with you there. If I could interject, I think that one of the big developments of the past few years is that people are working within that limited, like that constrained system that the TGA has outlined to actually expand medical access to all different kinds of people. And to everyone's credit within that space, you've seen massive changes occur. Not only within the legal frameworks, but in terms of how the outcomes are for people who are patients. And in many ways, I think that's actually normalized cannabis within Australia. I think that the tides are actually shifting in terms of the public opinion, in terms of, bringing about broader deregulation in the space, or just expanding access more broadly to people. So I don't necessarily see it as, I think there's a penchant for people to look at it in terms of black and white. It's got to be either medicinal or recreational. But honestly, the expansion of those schemes, even though they started with really humble and modest beginnings, I think there's still a real stigma against the medical cannabis schemes, because of once they were introduced, people tried to get onto them. They couldn't find ways to do it because the system wasn't really set up for it. But as that's changing, I think you see a broader shift within the entire culture of Australia and the way that it looks at, I guess, a medicine like cannabis. And that can only be a good thing for the recreational community.
Yeah, absolutely. And we actually, I mean, you know, it's not unheard of, you know, online in forums to hear about people who use it recreationally but have obtained a legal script for flower.
Right.
And how they're just, you know, like, people will always work within the framework that they're given. And, you know, it's kind of, I think a lot of the complaints about, you know, the system as it is, for every regulatory action that any regulator takes, be it Office of Drug Control, TGA, you know, there's always a reaction. And sometimes that reaction just isn't planned at all. I mean, the sheer traffic, the volume of traffic that the TGA had to receive in the early days for special access scheme approvals, and, you know, needing a separate permit from your state Department of Health and all these sorts of things, that, you know, it was kind of like, we'll provide access and then we'll try and figure out how it all works afterwards. And that really bottlenecked the system. And so people were waiting days, sometimes weeks, for approval. And now it's down to sort of same day approval on a special access scheme, you know, application. So yeah, things have definitely gotten better, resources been planned, but you know, Mitch and I are still very supportive of things like, you know, what I think Mitch is, we have talked about it before. He might have changed his view since our last conversation, but as I understand, we are broadly supportive of, you know, things like what they've done in the ACT, where there actually is a homegrow amnesty.
Yeah, right.
Would love to see that in Victoria and all the other states.
Us too.
Yeah. Yeah. Wonder if those clinics would be quite so busy up there if they had that, actually. But
that's a good point, to be honest. I think
I've actually thought that the way, if you wanted to have homegrow amnesty, you should do it in conjunction with the doctor. So you'd have to source your genetics directly from like a government supplier, like that's an approved supplier, and then
I don't like that.
So many genetics that would actually go.
I don't like that.
You're getting 5 seeds. Your doctor knows you're growing up to 5 plants from that. And, you know, that's
they have the serial number of the seed.
Yeah. I could just see Mitch is basically checking his watch to see if he's got 6 hours free, because he's about to chew our ear off about this.
Yeah,
no, just so you know, Mitch, I don't have 6 hours free to listen to you talk about this. But
I'll cut it down to 5.
If you could get it down to
at least 5.
No, I mean, there's a couple of reasons. One, I mean, that would just never really work, because, I mean, as soon as you've grown one plant, you can produce as many seeds as you want, or you can just clone, obviously. But the worst part about that would be using the genetics from the government.
True.
You know, that's the
when
last
I say
place.
Government regulator, like, I'm meaning they can have a private company, but you're going through someone that's government approved, and that's the private company, right? Like the same way kind of genetics work now.
Yeah.
You know, you have to go through someone who's gone through the accreditation effectively to be able to bring in those genetics.
Depends what the accreditation process is. I mean, if it's too strict, then it really prevents the possibilities for people to homegrow.
You don't necessarily have to have a, let's say, accredited supplier of genetics. You just need to have the relevant, you know, quality controls to ensure that meets the standards. So it could be, I mean, your grandma from, you know, Czech Republic could send it to you if it was if it met
assuming she doesn't already.
Exactly. Assuming it met all the regulatory compliance checklist, then you can import, and assuming that they can export.
See, I actually like that idea more. I think that opening up the kind of import and export of seeds, for instance, would actually benefit the community as a whole. Of course, there are a lot of like nitty gritty questions in terms of how that's actually executed. Like there's a whole lot of frameworks that jurisdictions have taken in terms of how do we actually go about legalizing cannabis? What is the specific processes? What's written in the books? Some of them go for a more like, here's an agency that regulates cannabis as a broader entity, or as a broader like plant medicine, or just kind of like a free for all, or you have like dispensary models, or you know, social various different models. I guess I'm interested with what Andrew has to say, and you, Mitch, as well, in terms of.
Don't worry about me.
Yeah, no. You can chime in if you want.
Okay.
That there's a real open debate to be had about you know, where Australia should go in terms of what approach we take. And I was wondering if you guys had a favorite one.
Ooh, yeah,
Yeah.
definitely a topic close to my heart. But I'll let the law student answer that one. Off you go, Mitch.
We got your secretary, you mean?
Yeah, sorry.
I mean,
Paralegal.
where should we go? I'd like to see it. I'm stuck between wanting to see it go more the way of America, where there's a bit of or Canada, where there's a bit of a free for all. But there's something about producing Australian quality product that is appealing to me, and that the way that other countries look at Australian made product. And it's not to say that we couldn't do both of those things concurrently. We produce amazing beer. It's not regulated in the same way that pharmaceuticals are, but I do think that there is a therapeutic application which necessitates it to some degree to sit in the medical sphere. Now, you might be able to have those two markets running parallel to each other,
right?
Have a recreational and a medical, and that's fine as well. And maybe only medical can be exported or something like that, and recreational can be used in Australia and has to comply with certain standards that you would expect from anything that you'd buy at Woolies, let's say.
Sure.
It comes with a certain guarantee, a certain kind of safety to it.
So maybe the medical stuff would have all of the quality control checks and be radiated and all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think if you're talking about people using it in hospital, for example, or talking about sending product to Germany or Switzerland or Japan or something like this, then potentially it makes sense to produce a standard. Say other countries always look to us for baby formula because they know it's the best quality. We've got the best air safety standards in the world. There's certain things that we do here that we're proud of to produce to that standard, and I wouldn't want to lose that air. But that's not to say we couldn't achieve that with broad deregulation and with recreational per se. So that's probably my view.
Yeah, I like that. It's a good insight.
Yeah, I think it's going to be, federal elections like the one we've just had are a great insight into just how disparate Australia is. And, like Melbourne is just so far removed from Broome, say, in so many respects. But
without a doubt,
I think that for that reason, any push towards recreational is likely to be state-led. And I think in a way, ACT has sort of dipped the toe in the water to, because if at any time the Commonwealth can veto that law. They've done it before with, I think it was the same-sex marriage.
They did, yeah.
Back in
2006.
Yeah. And then there was the euthanasia up in Northern Territory, similar treatment. So they haven't done that. And that was when we had a fairly conservative federal Liberal government that's just been turfed, thank goodness. But yeah, basically, don't let the door hit you on the way out.
That shirt you're wearing says otherwise, though, Andrew, I will say.
I borrowed it from Kirribilli House, where Scott Morrison, I understand, is still residing. Somebody really needs to.
He's just doing a garage sale to get rid of the
Just giving away his shirts at this point.
I wish he would just give away his ministers that survived the election. But anyway, but
I don't know. They might stay in the wilderness for a while.
Yeah, fingers crossed. Is there another chamber?
Not easy to kill Voldemort. You got to find the Horcruxes,
I did hear it said that, someone was like, oh, Voldemort, was only ever trying to kill one child. So that's the difference between the two. But anyway, sorry. No, sorry for that dark turn there. But it will be state-led because, and I have a feeling, even though I feel like it might be Queensland or Victoria that leads.
I think you're more likely to get Victoria than Queensland, to be honest. If we had an upper house, I would agree with you that Queensland would lead, but we don't have an upper house. So
the thing about the Queensland Labor government is that it is incredibly moderate and is not making radical moves towards progressive legislation. I think someone like Daniel Andrews in their Labor government, they're more likely to take that kind of political risk. If you have Palaszczuk up here, they're really just trying to keep hold of their majority because there's a massive regional population that is fairly conservative in terms of social issues. And I think they're more focused on that. There was a QPC, like a productivity commission report, which basically showed, this was maybe a couple of years ago, that showed that essentially, if you decriminalized all drugs, there would be this massive weight off of the kind of like penal system, the prisons and the court systems, up to the tune of, I think it was like $1 billion over, I don't know what time periods. That's not that effective in terms of a number, but
it was less than 5 years, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah. So there was this pretty significant findings within that report, and it was something that the Palaszczuk government put together, and they just completely rejected the findings of that report, which they're often apt to do, these governments. But it's interesting that they look at that data, they look at those findings, and they go, well, it's not actually worth the risk in terms of making a kind of sweeping political change.
A death note politically for them, possibly. And it is interesting. You guys got 3 Greens, lower house.
We do. All you fucking Victorians moved up here.
Southeast Queensland is a very different beast. It's a very different beast. Brisbane, it feels like a progressive capital, but you go like 100 kilometers out, it's completely different.
It's so different. Mitch and I were in Cairns middle of last year and went to a little town called Mareeba, which is HQ for Katter country, and to think that you got that in the same state as 3 lower house. But yeah, look, it could be Queensland, it could be Victoria, but one of the states is going to push for it. I guess there's implications as well if we go recreational to our obligations under international drug treaties. Would have implications for the Tasmanian opium industry.
Sure.
Because
we've looked at that actually. That's something that we've published in our little thing at Fab, because we see that as well. We go, well, the UN's got these existing, treaties. And a lot of it in terms of the pharmaceutical industry is operating off of the basis of those precedents.
Yeah, we could potentially lose the rights to grow our damn poppies.
Exactly. And then it's sort of like, if we go that direction, we shut down that industry and we emphatically tell the US and all the other signatories to that treaty, we're done. We're not doing this anymore. We want to actually have a separate industry in Australia that embraces cannabis. So, getting that kind of harmony between Commonwealth laws and whatever state decides to go rogue will be an interesting one to watch. But I totally agree with, I think probably everyone on this call probably agrees that, we have a great opportunity to position ourselves globally as an epicenter of quality, and we should definitely strive for that. I mean, Mitch and I, because of our background through Mitch's family, being involved in the space for nearly 40 years, we have an interest in seeing regulations around, actually calling something full spectrum, even if it's, regardless of whether it's made available for the medical or the rec market, like there just is no rules around that. And so, we would
a bit like consumer law in that way, like calling a spade a spade.
Yeah, and if there has to be
how about calling a strain by the actual strain? That'd be the biggest part as well.
It'd be nice, wouldn't it?
That's a nice to have. That's not.
I don't know.
Didn't the TGA say that's something akin to magic or something? There's rules around advertising on labels. Your label can't suggest magic of a sort, so we can't call it the Voldemort strain.
I personally was a little offended when Sadovite released their Yandi a while back, because I was like, Yandi, that's what the indigenous folk call cannabis here, right? But then the bud that they're bringing in was fucking Canadian grown, and I'm like, but that you can't call Canadian weed Yandi. No. I'm sorry, it's just not okay.
There's quite a few examples of that type.
The cultural appropriation.
Just taking Australian things and then calling it that because it's identifiable. But there's a pretty clear guidance now on what you can and can't say, and it can't be food products can't be magical in nature. So you can't call it unicorn dust or something like that. You can't call it anything that would inflate the sense of its efficacy. So like big burst or tasty, you know what I mean? You can't have anything that's suggestive of food and things like that.
So potentially, like for strains that comes to mind really quickly is maybe the word super. So like a super lemon haze, right? Because that's like, it's more super than the lemon haze.
You couldn't even use lemon haze anymore. So like now, technically going forward, and I think you'll see this in going, very soon, you're going to have like, P687Z kind of stuff.
To the extent that
Wow.
enforcement action is taken. That's always the caveat here.
See, that's a thing. It's like
Yeah.
you have all of these guidelines and regulations in the industry at the moment, but you see a lot of people playing it really fast and loose. Like you just a lot of companies that simply don't seem to care about it. It'll be interesting to see what kind of enforcement action is taken, if any.
I think companies don't care until they do. Once you get a fine slapped on you, or you get the warning that your license is at risk, then they seem to care.
Right.
But even then, sometimes they don't. They just challenge it. It depends, I guess, also how much cash you got.
Yeah. How deep are those pockets?
Yeah, dem pockets.
Actually, speaking of legal issues, did I hear a little whisper at the start of this conversation about what?
We should talk about it.
I'll break it down for you. Yeah,
our audience
give us an anecdote.
knows.
Our audience doesn't, and they're keen to hear it. I'll tell you right now.
Give me an excuse to get wet. Come on, guys.
All right.
Let's do it.
In September last year, in 21, we got raided here at Fab HQ with about 10 tactical cops that came in through the door.
They had a warrant for my name.
They're better than the untactical ones. Yeah, they're much more.
So they had a warrant for Mitch's name for possession. But prior to coming here, they went to my parents' house. I didn't update my address once we had moved. So they went there and they tried to kind of harass them a little bit. And they were like, he doesn't even live here. Why are you here?
We're not certain why they actually showed up. We think that it might have something to do.
I never saw the warrant from one at my parents' place. They never handed it to anyone. They never gave it to me after the fact because they obviously fucked up because I didn't live there. So I live 5 minutes away. Well, we live 5 minutes away from where my parents are, maybe a little longer, but about 5 minutes. And anywho, they come in and I had a phone call kind of hit me before they came saying they were at my parents' place. So I'm like, oh, okay, cool. I need to try and clean up. I didn't have much time. I had 5 minutes. I chopped down my one single plant. I had one plant and that was it. And by the time I basically did that, they were already like smashing in the door and I managed to get downstairs just before they smashed open the door, which would have sucked because it's a heritage listed door. Not my
just
favorite.
The door. Wow. Okay.
Just the door.
Not the house.
The house is upstairs, but the house got raised and we've got a whole bottom that's like unique. Anyway, irrelevant. So they come in, they do their questioning, they do their spiel, all that sort of shit. And basically they charge me with possession because I had a couple buds that were not in my medical containers. You're talking about like 2 nugs.
They found LSD in my room.
They found LSD in Mitch's room.
Did they take it?
They did.
They did take it.
They took our bongs. There was probably 6, 7 around the house. I think they stole one of my vaporizers because I haven't been able to find it since, and it was never on their report, which was fucking shit because it was. I don't know if you boys have ever seen the Cloud Evo Exhale. It's the bong vape that you can attach like a water piece to. It's fucking mint.
I think they assumed it was a bong of some kind.
But the thing is, it's like they would have been separate. So the other thing was like an electronic device. So they shouldn't have taken it. But anyway, frazzled. I didn't notice that they had taken it.
Was there like they confiscate empty Gatorade bottles over conspiracy to prepare bong or something like this?
Well, fucking what's hectic is you come in here and I've got like hundreds of grinders. I've got I had probably like 20 clean bongs that they couldn't.
You should have seen the evidence list. It was
it was like
10,
3 pages.
That's hilarious.
Unbelievable.
Oh my God. So it's a message to the cops, by the way. I'm just going to intervene. Fuck you. Don't hassle these guys. Sorry. Seriously, fuck you. And you know what?
We actually think that it might
go after me. Unless you actually if you work for the Queensland cops, bite me because you have no jurisdiction. But no, where were these people from? Was it AFP? Was it Queensland?
It was the Queensland police.
Yeah.
But what's interesting about all of this is
Dutton's old mob.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
They're
tops.
At the end when they were leaving, they were like, I was escorting him out and I can't remember what it was. And he's like, oh, look at you still even escorting us out and being polite. And I'm like, yeah, cops are tops. You're just doing your job. And I saw one of the cops snicker when I said cops is tops. And I'm like, oh yeah, you're not meant to tell cops that they're tops. My bad. But basically they knew of the the Friendly Aussie Buds brand. They knew of some of the articles we had because we had a few articles about how to grow in Australia outdoor, how to grow indoor. There's a bit of a shopping list on there. And it was framed with the context of how to grow when it's legal. not how to grow immediately. So that was kind of my way of looking at the articles as
attempts to create a loophole there.
A bit of a loophole, you know, it's just information. But basically one of the cops told me to take down those articles because I could be charged with a federal crime of teaching people how to commit crimes. I forgot what he referred to it as, but he basically told me that. And I was like, oh, okay. So I just put them all into a draft mode. I'm just waiting for legalization or a state to hit, and I'll fucking hit those again and publish. But there was about 20, 30 articles that we had that were quite solid. They were a huge chunk of the fab traffic. So I took them down on that. I talked to a few lawyers. Most told me pretty much an empty threat. Probably they would never even charge it or anything like that. If they were going to do something like that, it would have been the actual AFP. But in the same regard, I haven't put those articles back up because I don't really want to deal with the headache. And the thought was maybe they got wind of us through some of those articles. If you Googled growing cannabis Australia, we'd be like, you know, top 3 links.
Yeah, it's a bit of a mystery as to why they actually decided to take us down. It might have been a tip-off, but it might have been them doing their research.
There's a couple things. So I ran for the Legalized Cannabis Queensland Party the year prior. So I had a political...
Did well in the last election.
We got 4% of that vote. And on this one in Queensland, we got like 7. We nearly kicked out Pauline from the Senate. Almost.
Nice.
Fucking next time, we probably will.
Yes.
So... there's a bit of all of that. And circling back to it all, basically, I was also trolling the Palaszczuk government on Instagram a little bit.
Me too on Facebook.
So
I think Mark Bailey did me in,
you put the target on your back.
Yeah. Mark Bailey's our local member, and Mitch was having some meetings and harassing him.
He told me something
bit.
like "stay fab," and I'm like, "Oh, it's a conspiracy. He knows that I exist."
Yeah. So
Andrew, what's the legal opinion regarding whether, you know, they can't have growing content?
Yeah, we need to know about this.
Well, I must admit, I guess the Commonwealth Criminal Code is pretty expansive. It wouldn't surprise me if there was something in there that effectively said, you know, you can't teach people how to grow cannabis, how to make pipe bombs, how to, you know, commit crimes overseas. There's some sort of sections that relate to being able to be tried in Australia for things that you do overseas, extraterritorial jurisdiction and all of that. But yeah, I need to look into it, but I do.
But now that we're doing it legally.
Yeah, I think the thing that just bothers me is I just feel like when you read about statistics for things like DV and all these other things, I just think surely there's got to be higher priorities than this.
And that's basically the defining theme of our journey in court. It was just like, wow, what a waste of resources, basically.
Totally. You know,
10 cops to give me a $1,500 fine and no conviction.
It's actually
what's their hourly worth?
That like Friendly Geordie's case. I don't know if you guys are familiar where
we did follow that.
Yeah. We followed that and we're like, is this us? This is kind of us.
That's you guys. You know, the power of the state just being used in a kind of an abusive process manner to just intimidate people. And it's like, guys, you've got so much more important shit you need to be doing. Please just, or unless, I guess I could flip it the other way. And I'm like, if that is the highest priority on their list, then I'm thinking Queensland is in a pretty good space. You know, there's no crime really. They've
solved all the problems.
They've solved everything. But
we haven't had a domestic violence case here for like at least 3 years. You know? Not a chance.
Yeah, no, it's honestly, and it's that kind of, you know, that sort of intimidatory and all this sort of bullshit that has driven so many great Australians in the space overseas. I mean, Mitch's uncle is one of them. Neville Schoenmakers was another. He was from WA. These are like revered people in the cannabis industry globally. And people here, when you sort of explain, actually that person is from Australia originally, and he got out in the 80s because he was dealing with all this kind of crap. It all makes sense. I mean, I'm hopeful that, you know, literally in the next sort of decade of our lifetime, not just in our lifetime, that we're going to be the beneficiaries of you know, changes. But yeah, Mitch, am I at liberty to even bring that up? Like, can you talk a little bit about all that?
That's an interesting story.
Yeah, well, the reason we're in it is due to my uncle, to be honest. And we've actually had him on one of our podcasts, Scott Blakey. His name's Shanti Baba. He's pretty well known.
I know him. We've seen him on forums and stuff.
Yeah. So he's pretty famous. You know, he created White Widow and a few other very famous strains. He's got Super Silver Haze, and actually he's still got one of his strains still features half the genetics of Mullumbimby Madness.
Right,
and
exactly. That's how we know about him.
Yeah. Well, I mean, talking about, there's certain stories which I'm probably not at full liberty to discuss, but he was doing a lot of groundwork in Australia back in those days in the 80s and such. And I think it was somewhere in the, don't quote me on this, but somewhere in the 70s that it became actually illegal to do. But the work that they were doing in creating new genetics and strains in Australia, it just couldn't be done here in the way that it could be done in Europe and, say, Netherlands and Spain at the time, and much grayer and much more open to that kind of culture. So, taking a lot of those seeds from all around the world, Afghanistan, India, Thailand, Brazil, these types of places, Mexico, and having to take all of that IP and that potential offshore to another country in Europe where they could be developed and really create a legacy away from where otherwise Australian ingenuity would have been able to flourish and create something quite amazing. I mean, we have such an amazing climate for it.
Yeah,
and
so true.
What
a loss.
It was a real loss. And he's now an expat with this wealth of information and this wealth of this incredible genetic seed bank, and we're trying to bring that back in the products that we do through Phytoka.
Yeah, can you speak more about that? We wanted to bring that up.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a lot of companies out there. There's a lot of strains out there. I guess there's no verification on where these strains come from. So, you can grow anything and say it's whatever you want to say. It's G13 because shit, who's going to check? The reality is that if you're wanting to find the right type of strain, you're wanting to get that original Gorilla Glue, you want that diesel sour, whatever it is you want to get, you don't need to just find that strain. You need to find it from the brand that originally created it, I think, or at least the original grower, to have any semblance of authenticity. And
so it comes down to the genotype, pretty much.
Yeah, I mean, there are ways to track it, but not for the average person, and even then, it's very difficult. The only way you can guarantee you're going to have something that is of that original pedigree is to get it from the source, and that's certain growers in America and Europe, and that's pretty much about it, to be honest. So we're very lucky. We've got some genetic, let's say, nepotism that we're happy to try and bring back to Australia, because it's something that I think belongs here, and part of our journey is to really hone in on those genetics and breed, as Andrew said, full spectrum, but actually full spectrum, making sure that those minor cannabinoids, acidic compounds, terpene profiles are there, and bring back some of the things that won these cannabis cups in the 80s and 90s that just are around sparingly. There are certain people that have got it in guerrilla grows in Australia that maybe did get the right genetics, were unbelievable growers, but you can't reproduce that. And if they get raided, it's gone. And you know what I mean? There's just no consistency. And I think that, or at least all my life growing up, whenever you got cannabis, is like, there were two types of cannabis, out like bushweed and hydro, or good weed and shit weed. Like there was no strains, there was no differentiation. We know how different those experiences can be, and the types of quality and product you can get. So bringing back some of that connoisseur mentality and the ability to have something specifically for a moment, a mood, an indication, whatever it is you want. You don't always feel like a beer. Sometimes you feel like a red wine. Sometimes you feel like a tequila. And regardless of the recreational side of things, there's also therapeutic applications for those. So for us, it's really about, bringing in a different plant than or a different oil or a different product, whatever it is, not just based on purely sterility, but also based on, the profile that product conveys.
That's amazing. That's the kind of stuff that I think our scene currently needs, in terms of, actually preserving that legacy of people attempting to do just that into the past. It's great that you're continuing that work into the future.
Yeah, well, I think we've done some good things in terms of the quality controls and standards that, when you get something in Australia, it should be of a certain standard.
Sure.
But that's just the first step, and there's such a bigger journey at play here where we really need to focus on, and it will happen eventually, this product differentiation. But there's so much IP
Marketing hype.
Yeah, there's just so much knowledge that goes into. There's so many stages of it, right? First, you have to have the genetics because, we've explained this on a couple of our talks. It's like, if my parents aren't 6'7", I'm probably just not going to play basketball that easily. Like, it's got to be within your remit. It's got to be in your genetic code to actually produce CBG or CBC or these types of compounds, let's say. Secondly, you need to have a cultivator that is actually able to, well, first you have to select the phenos that'll express that if you don't have a cutting, but then you need to actually have a cultivator who's going to make sure that comes out and all the facilities to do that.
Yeah, right.
So you've got nature versus nurture, but then you've got this extra nurture step that if you want to produce anything that's a manufactured product, an oil, there's certain processes that favor sterility. There's certain processes that favor maintaining the integrity of the original plant. So maintaining terpenes, maintaining minor cannabinoids or more volatile compounds, let's say.
That's important to develop consistency in the product, right?
Yeah, well, there's different levels at which consistency is important. So you also want stabilized genetics and stabilize and controlled rooms where you can reproduce the same thing. But then you also want to make sure that your extraction method maintains those things and doesn't kill it based on the pressure or the temperature. And then you also want to choose the right platform to kind of present that. So, what carrier oil are you using? Are you using something cheap like MCT oil or hemp seed oil, which coagulates, that ironically and counterintuitively is not a great carrier oil? Or are you using something a bit more interesting that's enhances the delivery of cannabinoids? So that's just in the oil market. Then if you go into vapes and distillate and all these different types of formats, there's new considerations again, because you're further distilling, further removing things from the original plant. So there's more considerations in how you affect that. So
I just want to clarify that the information being conveyed is general in nature and can't be relied upon by anyone listening to this podcast. You should speak to your doctor should you require any specific medical advice that is particular to your condition.
To acknowledge.
No, just as a comment, really.
So natural.
Yeah, absolutely. Just got to slip it in. Well, on that note, I feel like there's going to be a part 2, and I'm sorry that we've got a hard stop today, guys, but we really need, there's 50 other topics that I feel like we could jump down the rabbit hole on.
Yeah. Let's jump back in again.
Let's do it, because we're turning this into an Altmed, 45 minutes to an hour, but you boys do your what is it, 3 hours or 3 days?
Sometimes it's 3 weeks. Yeah.
Sometimes it's 3 hours, but generally we stick to an hour and a half.
Is there an episode that you were filming that you were doing whilst the police raided? Did you?
I was the only one home.
I was the
only one home.
Okay. All right. Well,
and you weren't even home because you don't live there anymore.
Well, no. I live here. But
that's well, we can make the next one a longer form. Make it a bit of a part 2 and 3 combined.
You guys got to come up to Queensland, and we'll get the round table going, and we'll
have you here.
I'm down for that.
Man,
I'm down for that.
So down.
Because Andrew's just cut you off after me doing the whole spiel. You didn't even get to question me about it. So we'll definitely have to do another one.
Okay. Pick up where we left off.
Yeah, 100%.
No, it's been awesome, guys. Great conversation. And I hope you have success with your own podcast into the future.
Continue likewise, guys. We I've got a few episodes on the Friendly Aussie to catch up on. So we'll do that, and let's have part 2 and 3 very soon.
Sounds
awesome.
Good.
Really
All
good.
right.
Thanks,
Till
lads.
next time, guys. Take care.
Thanks.
Cheers.
Bye.
You too. Catch you, Andrew.
Bye.
See you, Mitch.